Welcome into the Single High Coverage Podcast. I'm your host, Ethan Woodie, and today I am joined by my friend Logan Ulrich, managing editor at NFL Trade Rumors. Logan, how are we doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Happy to talk some football on Wednesday night.
Love talking football. Yes, we're recording on a Wednesday night. This podcast is going to come out on Friday, so we're not going to get into the Bills Dolphins matchup. Thursday night football. But we're going to recap a little bit of the week one action, go through some power rankings in advance of week two, and kind of discuss some of our overall takeaways and overreactions for some different players and teams from week one. So we're going to walk through my week two power rankings, which you can find on the NFL Trade Rumors website. And starting at 32, we have the Carolina Panthers, who had a disappointing performance in what was supposed to be a retooled offense for second year quarterback Bryce Young. 31 is the New York Giants, who also had a disappointing performance at home with Daniel Jones's return from injury against the Sam Darnold led Minnesota Vikings. At 30, we have the Washington Commanders, who weren't really able to run with the Buccaneers and rookie quarterback Jane Daniels' first start. At 29, we have the New England Patriots, who pulled the upset of the week, maybe of the season, over the Cincinnati Bengals. A 16-10 win over a team that we all thought was going to maybe play for a Super Bowl and still could, but the Patriots, a team expected to compete for the top overall pick, definitely did not look like a team that's among the worst in football. The Denver Broncos coming at number 28. The Broncos, Bo Nix getting his first start against the Seahawks. The defense looked really good, able to keep the Seahawks offense in check and get a couple of safeties, but the offense really wasn't able to get much going. 27, Las Vegas Raiders. Disappointing game management decision from head coach Antonio Pierce led to a final score that was not really indicative of how close the game was. But that's kind of what punting from the opposing 40 with 4 minutes left in the game will get you. And then at 26, we have the Cleveland Browns, maybe the most disappointing performance of the week outside of the Bengals, a team that had a lot of hopes after making the wild card round last year. Deshaun Watson, man, just does not look like himself, or maybe he does. This is just kind of what he's been the last couple of years in Cleveland.
Yeah, I think the Browns actually, I haven't gone through this exhaustively. I think the Browns probably had your biggest drop with a nine point drop.
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, biggest drop of nine spots. They were 17th in the preseason rankings.
yeah, so that's like, you're looking at a borderline wild card team. Like whenever you do these power rankings, they all kind of end up in tiers anyways, and like the actual ranking is maybe doesn't tell you as much about it as the tier does, but you go from
Mm-hmm.
borderline wild card in the mix in the AFC North to like, bottom of the barrel in the AFC with that, such a stat conference. Like,
Yeah, it's going to be tough for the Browns to compete in what, like you said, a loaded AFC, and forget the conference, a loaded AFC North division.
yeah.
If Deshaun Watson's going to play like that, but let's start with the Carolina Panthers and Bryce
Yeah. Well, Ethan, this team makes me sad.
Young. Some Yeah, Young was taken first overall in 2023, and what is looking like a pretty good quarterback class overall. He has not lived up to the billing of some of his compatriots. Um, really rough rookie season, and the hope coming into this year was that with a more stable environment, some expensive upgrades along the offensive line, an investment in some new receivers with Deontay Johnson coming over from the Steelers and drafting Xavier Legette out of South Carolina in the first round. Hopefully, the hope was that this new environment would allow him to settle in a little bit and showcase some of the stuff he's able to do at Alabama. Unfortunately, he had a disastrous first start of the season where the team as a whole, and Bryce Young in particular, looked maybe worse than they did a year ago. What did you see in the game against the Saints, and
Yeah.
how do you think Bryce Young's season can go from here?
Yeah. So I'll come out and first like, do an acknowledgement. I my as I've been an NFL writer for a while, and that tends to like purge you of a lot of biases. But I root for the Carolina Panthers. I'm from North Carolina. Been going to games, at least one a year with my dad and brother for a long time. I have a tough time remembering a loss where they were as thoroughly outplayed in all three phases, like offense, defense, special teams. Like they were just outclassed right from the beginning. I mean, 47-10 tells you a lot, but like,
Hmm.
I have to go back to like 2008 when like Jake Delhomme had the meltdown in the divisional round against the Cardinals to think of something that was this like catastrophic. Like, particularly too, like again, the bar for this team was in the basement. They won 2 games last year. They earned the number one pick. You know, there wasn't like all the fans were asking for is a little bit of improvement. Like, let's see like Bryce look like the number one pick and like the franchise savior that he was supposed to be. And not only was this like more the same from last year, like this was worse than any tape they put out last year. Like it was abominable. It was horrendous. And it's week one. Um, you get funny stuff in week one. These guys are all professionals, like they have pride. Like there's a lot of incentive for this team to be better. And they also like they hardly did anything during the preseason. Like Bryce got the starting offense had one series together in the last preseason game, and I think you saw some of that rust like overall. But yeah, I don't know. Like you want to say that it can't get worse, but you know, it always can.
Yeah. Bryce Young in particular really didn't give a lot of reason for hope. I know the team as a whole was very disappointed in
No.
that defense. It might be the worst defense in the NFL we've seen in a couple of years, based on how good they made what we know is a pretty mediocre New Orleans offense look like.
Yeah.
Um,
Also,
Bryce Young, 13 of 30 for 161 yards and 2 interceptions. That is not what you want to see from your hopeful franchise savior.
yeah, it's bad, Ethan. Not we could make this entire podcast about like Bryce Young, so not to like belabor things too much. Like I guess, the only thing I'd say before we like move on up the list is, I don't think we've seen the most, I'll put it this way, the most concerning part about Bryce Young as an NFL player right now is how completely overwhelmed he looks. At Alabama, he was legitimately, again, he won the Heisman Trophy. He was pretty close, like it wasn't like a slam dunk consensus like you've seen with Trevor Lawrence or Caleb Williams, but he was the consensus like number one pick. And yet pretty much, again, consensus is difficult to define, but probably the majority of the teams in the NFL, if they had been in the Panthers position, they would have taken Bryce Young as well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it just is not translated, like period. Like he's playing the same style that he did at Alabama of, trying to like distribute and create out of the pocket. But he's just like the strengths of his game at Alabama have not transferred. Like he's not poised, he's not accurate, um, he's not dynamic. Um, so yeah,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, as someone who had Bryce Young as my quarterback one in that class, what's concerning to me about Bryce, kind of like you said, is that none of the things that he was good at Alabama have translated to the NFL, but it does match the scouting report. Like if you were looking at all the Bryce skeptics and naysayers, kind of what they were saying at the time of if he like worst case scenario, this is what Bryce Young is going to look like in the NFL. This is kind of what we're seeing right now.
yeah,
Is because unlike someone like Anthony Richardson, who his rocket arm and rushing ability were like bankable things he knew would translate right away, or CJ Stroud's like prototypical frame and pinpoint accuracy you knew he'd be able to like bank on right away. What made Bryce Young so special at Alabama were the intangibles, his feel for the game, his ability to find receivers he had no business finding, his ability to make plays outside of structure. He's an accurate quarterback, but not the most accurate quarterback. He has adequate arm strength, but he's not going to go throw for throw with Josh Allen, right? So for him, it was always expected to take a little bit of time to adjust because unlike some of the other prospects, like we know Anthony Richardson was going to be able to run someone over in the NFL from day one, and if CJ Stroud had a clean pocket, he'd be able to pick apart a defense. With Bryce, we expected it might take some time for those things to come along, and at least a year and one game into his career, they really haven't.
I mean that's not what the Panthers expected to be perfectly honest with you there. Like that last year, the expectation was they were going to compete for the division because Bryce was pro ready. had a great understanding of the game, had that NFL level like poise and intangibles, and that he just was, it was an awful situation last year. And so far this year, his confidence looks like it's shot. So, hopefully, like the fan in me speaking a little bit, hopefully like he turns it around. But that's at this point, all you can do is just hope because there hasn't been anything like tangible to like bank on.
I mean, as a fan of Bryce Young, I also hope that he can turn things around and make me a little bit more right in the process. Win for everyone. Um, Moving on to 31, the New York Giants. We don't need to spend too much time on them, but I did want to touch on them briefly because after 1 week, it's kind of looking like a two-team race for the number one overall pick. The Patriots could make their way back into that conversation, or another team that could kind of rack up losses faster than we expect. But these are the two worst teams in week one, and two teams we kind of expected would be in the conversation anyway. Um, about Daniel Jones specifically, he's working on that contract we all kind of knew would age poorly when they signed it. Um, in a quarterback class that, at least as of right now, 2 weeks into the college football season, there isn't a quarterback kind of expected to be this coveted top five type pick. If the Giants end up with a top three, number one overall type pick, um, do you think they're going to bring back Daniel Jones and try and run this back?
We are so far out. I would say I don't obviously there's going to be a ton that changes. I would say historically, like if this based on this current trajectory, if the season play like again, Brian Dable was asked this past week, is Daniel Jones still your starter? And it was after week one. So like at this current trajectory, they're gonna have almost no choice but to hit the reset button. They have the out in Jones's contract, so no matter what, I don't know off the top of my head what his base salary is. I know it's not guaranteed except for injury, which is could come up later this year. Um, Whatever it is, they're not going to pay him that. If this continues the current trajectory, they'll go find a cheaper bridge quarterback, and then from there, it's just their evaluation. You know, More often than not, quarterback needy teams tend to see what they want to see at the top of the draft. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. We talked a little bit about the Browns already, so we're going to move into our next group of teams here. At 25, we have the Los Angeles Chargers, who got the aforementioned win over the Raiders in Week One. At 24, we have the Vikings, jumped 2 spots, put a beat down on the Giants. The Saints at 23, fresh off that win over the Carolina Panthers. At 22, we have the Arizona Cardinals, who, while they weren't able to pull off the win, hung tough with the Bills for 4 quarters and really gave a scare to one of the AFC's top contenders. And at 21, we have the Tennessee Titans, who dominated for 3 quarters against the Chicago Bears until Will Levis decided that they didn't really want to win the game anyway. So, is there anything that stands out to you in that group from week one?
just, seeing the Titans at 21 initially, I was like, huh, that's a little high. But then you look at the rest of this tier, it's like it's razor thin with all these teams. You could put them in like any order. The Chargers, I think Chargers going to be interesting because they looked exactly how I thought they would. It's going to be Greg Roman, Jim Harbaugh. We're going to run the ball a ton. Um, let's go J.K. Dobbins, by the way. Super happy for him, looking as good as he did coming off all those injuries. But yeah, Chargers looked exactly like, what we thought preseason. Sam Darnold had a good first game. Um, the Saints, I kind of liked the Saints as like as a sneaky fall apart team. Just, anytime you have a coach who comes into the year on the hot seat, you just have to watch out for that because if you hit a bump in the road, you hit some adversity, and it's easier for the players to kind of check out and start like looking out for number one. Um, Fortunately for them, they bumped into like an even worse team in week one. And they looked solid. Like they still have like the defense is very well coached. Like, I'm not a
Mm-hmm.
fan. I'm not a fan of Dennis Allen as a head coach. He knows what he's doing on the defensive side of the ball, and you could like that definitely like came through. So a lot of their upside is going to be they hired a new offense coordinator, Clint Kubiak, son of longtime head coach Gary Kubiak, and like off that same Shanahan tree that's in vogue right now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
This is, I believe, he's been an offensive coordinator before, but I believe this is his first time as a solo play caller. Maybe he did it with the Vikings. We'll have to do a fact. Listeners will have to fact check me. But that's kind of the X factor here of like they have some talent on offense. The offensive line is in rough shape, but if you run the Shanahan system well, you can mask some of the weaknesses on the offensive line. Um, they did some, as a unfortunate watcher of that game, they did some really interesting stuff with Taysom Hill. Literally like pitching him the ball as a running back on several plays. Um, Taysom is 35 or something like that and looks like he's still 25. Like it's amazing. So that'll be something like they have a few primetime slots later in the year, and I think Taysom will pick up some steam and like kind of the national conversation there. Yeah, I mean, other than that, like these, this is the messy middle here.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. The Saints are an interesting group. Like you said, that offensive line is a problem.
Yeah.
Um, Trevor Penning kind of forced into the starting lineup once again, and has an unfortunate habit of throwing defenders into his quarterback's legs. Um, but like you said, the Shanahan system is known for being able to overcome offensive line injuries and poor play better than really any other scheme in the country. I mean, last year you saw what Houston was able to do with all the decimating offensive line injuries they had. They were still one of the top offenses and didn't seem to really miss a beat in the passing game, at least. So there's some hope that that system can help New Orleans stay competitive even as they're struggling maybe more than they expected to.
Yeah. The big thing with the Saints is just the margin for error. Like they're an older team. Their depth has been decimated by the way that they've handled their salary cap, which they kind of like, in for a penny, in for a pound sort of deal. They kind of have needed to double down in a lot of ways to like stay competitive, and the team very much wants to stay competitive and doesn't want like an ugly rebuild or anything like that. So there's not a lot of depth. There's a lot of key players who are older, and the coach is on the hot seat. So if you hit adversity like injuries, losses start to pile up, you can see it's just a little bit like shaky. But as long as you're up 30-0 in the first half, things look great. But
Yeah, absolutely. So uh, we're gonna jump into our next group of teams here. At 20, we have the Chicago Bears, who managed to steal the win from the jaws of defeat against the Tennessee Titans, despite not scoring anything on offense. At 19, we had the Atlanta Falcons, who had some high hopes coming into the year and didn't really look like themselves, or at least how we expected they would look to open the season against the Steelers. At 18, we have said Pittsburgh Steelers, who didn't get a ton of offensive production, but look as solid as ever, and that defense is going to be a problem all year long. At 17, we have the Seattle Seahawks, who looked a little shakier than I think people expected against the Broncos, but still managed to get the win. And at 16, we have the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who were firing on all cylinders against the Commanders and look like the NFC South is still their division to lose.
yeah,
Um, Jumping in here with the Falcons, people had a lot of high expectations for this team coming into the season. The narrative with the Falcons for the last few years, not too dissimilar to the New York Jets, has been like, oh, this is a strong roster. They're just a quarterback away. Um, we found out this week that maybe they're not, or at least the quarterback they got is not going to be the quarterback that gets them to where they want to go. What did you see from the Falcons this week?
yeah. So I'm gonna belabor the stuff that's all over Twitter right now about Kirk Cousins and the way that the offense was structured. They ran like off the top of my head, not having like this handy. They ran something like 80% of their plays out of the pistol. Cousins had like, I don't know if it was 10 snaps a season or 10 snaps in his career in the pistol to that point, which is just staggering. Even more staggering, they did not run a single play action pass. Um, which mind-boggling for someone from the Shanahan tree, which their new offensive coordinator is Zach Robinson, who was the quarterback coach for the Rams the past couple of years and was viewed like very, very highly coveted as a coordinator this offseason. new Falcons head coach Raheem Morris kind of had the inside track to bringing him over. Um, so it's just like, you have to talk about like Cousins' Achilles at this point, like with how uncomfortable he looked, with how weird the offense was structured. Oh, this was the other one. This was like a next gen stat, measuring like how often a quarterback like runs, and it defines runs as hitting speeds of 6 to 12 miles per hour. And Cousins had by far like the lowest running amount of his career, meaning he was a stationary pocket passer, even more. The book on Cousins coming in is he's a stationary pocket passer, and he was even more statuesque in this game. So it's like a thing of, is this something that gets better as he gets more comfortable and more and further away from his surgery and more into his rehab, or how long is this going to linger? Because like this is going to linger a long time. It's going to be rough.
We're already seeing calls for number 8 overall pick Michael Penix Jr. to play next week, and that is not where the Falcons thought they would be
No.
1 week into this season. They were supposed to have finally figured out their quarterback position, and with a strong running game and some weapons on the outside, finally kind of have that offense click and come together. And at least through 1 week, that's not what's happened. Although, in fairness to the Falcons' offense, that Steelers' defense looks as good as it ever has.
Yeah, it's
TJ Watt
very solid. Yeah.
absolutely destroyed Caleb McGarry, the Falcons' right tackle, all game long. To the point where you just almost feel bad for the guy by the end of the game. Like they're just leaving him on an island one on one. They're not giving him any help. And hopefully they're not going to run to TJ Watt every week. So Kirk Cousins might have a little bit more stable of a pocket in the future. Uh, let's talk a little bit about the Seahawks, because they were a team both of us kind of pegged as maybe a surprise team that could, uh, you know, maybe not win the division, although I think you did pick them to win the NFC West, but
Yeah.
at least make some noise in sort of an uncertain second tier in the NFC. Not really what we wanted to see from them in week one. The offense kind of looked uncomfortable the entire game, largely from my initial viewing due to the offensive line. The Broncos pass rush caused a lot of problems for that unit. What did you see from the Seahawks?
I think there are two things here. I think the offensive line definitely has some issues. They were down Abraham Lucas, who is normally the starting right tackle. He's still working his way back from a knee injury last year. They signed George Fant this offseason, who is for like if you need a backup tackle, like George Fant is about as good as you're going to get in the NFL, in which there are not 64 quality like starting tackles available for teams. Like,
Mm-hmm.
George Fant as a backup, he's good enough to start for a handful of other teams. He went down. And so you're on fourth stringer Stone Forsyth. You have already, like, there were questions about the interior a little bit and how that would come together. Um, so yeah, I do think there were offensive line. The second thing is I think the Broncos defense is going to be a lot better than people think. They have some very underrated players up front. You've got Zach Allen, who's just always been solid as like kind of a big end. You got DJ Jones, who's an established run stuffing nose tackle. You've got Jonathan Cooper, Baron Browning on the edges, who've kind of like flown more under the radar. But Cooper has had something like 16 sacks over the last 2 years or something like that. And Browning can
Mm-hmm.
Browning can bend, and if he like puts it together, he has like upper echelon pass rusher ability. So like just Oh, and John Franklin Myers, who they stole from the Jets because they needed to clear room for the Hassan Reddick trade. And so they gave
Highway
him up for like
robbery.
a seventh round pick or a pick swap or something. And again,
Yeah.
he's another underrated dirty work guy who's just going to go like mess up your protection schemes. So, I know we're talking about the Seahawks, but I wanted to like make sure to mention that about the Broncos.
Mm-hmm.
I think overall, one thing I was really encouraged is how good the defense looked schematically. Like, I think they're going to have a lot of success even when they're not playing a rookie quarterback in his first start. And ultimately, again, like you noted in your power rankings article, Geno Smith played well, settled in after a bad early pick, and you're going to have some of those throws with Geno sometimes, but you
Yeah.
know he's a big stabilizing force for them on offense. So I really, this whole tier that you have right here, there's a lot of teams. Like I like the Steelers as if I was betting on what your power rankings that you turn into me in 2 weeks are going to look like, I would be betting on the Steelers as a riser here, and I'd be betting on the Seahawks, and I'd be betting on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well as teams that are kind of get up into that like close borderline top 10, back end of the top 10 range.
Yeah, there's definitely some teams here that have some upward mobility in terms of where they can finish the season. I mean, if Baker Mayfield plays like he did on Sunday, the Buccaneers are going to score some upsets and be one of the top teams in the NFC, which I don't think people. They might be the most underrated team entering the season. I mean, myself as well. I had them like 19th or I believe in my preseason rankings, and clearly they're better than that. And this is a veteran team that can win some games. Moving into our next group here, we have the Green Bay Packers at 15, who hung tough with the Eagles in Brazil before Jordan Love had a scary looking injury that doesn't look quite as severe as maybe initially predicted. Jacksonville Jaguars at 14 made a pretty significant jump in my rankings. Um, this is a team that hung tough with the Miami Dolphins and probably should have won that game in Miami. At 13, the Cincinnati Bengals, 11 spot drop for them after the loss to the Patriots. I know the Browns were not the biggest
Yeah, I was just
followers.
about to say we lied. It was a different AFC North team.
The different AFC North team, the Bengals had to take a hit after whatever it was they put on the field against the New England Patriots on Sunday. The Miami Dolphins sitting at 12, kind of hanging steady after sneaking past the Jaguars, and the Buffalo Bills drop a spot just outside the top 10 to number 11 after managing to escape the Arizona Cardinals. Let's talk about the Packers a little bit and what Jordan Love's injury might mean for them moving forward. This is a team that traded for Malik Willis from the Tennessee Titans right before the start of the season to be their backup quarterback after they weren't super thrilled with second year, fifth round pick Sean Clifford out of Penn State, an undrafted free agent this year, Michael Pratt out of Tulane. Neither of those players really excited them, so they took a shot on a high upside athletic project quarterback in Malik Willis. But Malik has started games in the past and has looked pretty one-dimensional doing so. He's a running threat. He can heave the ball downfield, and that's about it. Uh, what do you think the Packers are going to need to do to stay competitive while Jordan Love is out?
So really quick, Pratt was a seventh rounder, but he's in Tampa Bay right now on their practice squad. So, Green Bay just was not complete reset on the depth chart behind Love. So I have bad news for your Colts in that I think this week is going to be the best that it's going to be the best that he's looked as a pro. Two, it's going to be the best that he looks this year. Because you always get the whole like backup quarterback effect of like expectations are ridiculously low. Guys are coming in with like little notice, and so coaches pull out the stops to try and like do everything that they can to make them successful. Think about like Josh Dobbs with multiple teams last year. You'd always
Mm-hmm.
start out hot, and then things would kind of like deteriorate as they went. And then you had like a couple years ago, Baker Mayfield coming in on like 3 days notice and winning that game for the Rams on Thursday Night
Yeah.
Football. Was it Thursday?
Yeah, it was Thursday Night Football, and he was signed on Tuesday night and
Yeah.
was sent the playbook like on the plane that night.
Oh, it was ridiculous. That's still to this date one of the most incredible things I've seen an NFL player do. Like that was just and a
Yeah.
team and player. Like that was a group effort to like get him ready. But anyways, I think so. Willis is probably going to start. They did give Sean Clifford some first team reps in practice today. Probably more as like a, you know, just in case sort of thing, like, because there's a non-zero chance he gets hurt or has to be benched or something like that. So like,
Mm-hmm.
Clifford's going to be up and going to be active. So you might have like, you need to cover your bases. I think the other silver lining for the Packers is, it looks like they haven't put him on injured reserve, which you know, a big chunk of that is just keeping their options open because once he's on, he's out 4 games no matter what.
Hmm.
This way he has a chance to beat the timeline. Um, but it's looking like he can maybe only miss like 3 games, which if you're Green Bay, you it's not ideal because you're already 0 and 1. So you need to steal a game or two out of like this next like slate, but it's also not like it's not an irretrievable hole either. If it's just 3, I mean, if he had torn his ACL, like it looked like, I mean, that's it. Where Green Bay is maybe, I'm probably not going to say they're like competing for the number 1 pick, because I think Matt LaFleur is too good of a coach and there's too much talent on the roster. But like it looks bad if that happens.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, in terms of stealing a game, this Sunday against the Colts is a good opportunity to do that. They're at home against a team that really struggled to defend the run on Sunday against the Texans. So, that is Malik Willis's biggest strength. They have Josh Jacobs and Marshawn Lloyd, the rookie out of USC, in the backfield. They can scheme some up with Jaden Reed in the slot. They have a chance to manufacture some production there and help Malik Willis out. Um, we got to talk about the Bengals. They were I, they were my pick to make the Super Bowl out of the AFC. I don't remember if you were Nate or the other one that had them, but they did
I
not look like.
was gonna say it's
Yeah,
probably Nate. Yeah. I was
yeah.
gonna ask how you were feeling about that pick now.
They did not look like a team. Forget the Super Bowl. They did not look like a team ready for the playoffs in their opening game. That said, that's kind of what we've expected of the Joe Burrow led Bengals. That's what they've done the past couple of years. Start 0-1, 0-2, look absolutely awful, and then flip a switch and be one of the best teams in football the rest of the season. Was there anything in Sunday's game that gives you more concern than you've had in the past, or that you makes you think this might be different this time and it might be a real concern?
It looked a lot like past early past early season Bengals. Like, I had this in the week 1 reaction article I wrote. Burrow has like a 1-4 record in week 1.
Yeah.
Someone else on Twitter expanded it to like he's 1-8 or something in the first 2 weeks over the past 4 years. So like it for whatever reason, like it just takes them time to like sync up and hit a rhythm. I would probably if I was doing these, I probably would still keep them in like the top 10 or so, just because like again, we've seen like 3 or 4 years of this pattern. And
Mm-hmm.
eventually that's gonna bite you as a team. But like, Burrow, he didn't play well, but he also didn't play like I've seen him play worse to start the season. Like last year's opener, and again, he was hurt, so that has to be factored in too. But last year's opener was atrocious. He had an opener in 2022, I think, against the Browns. Either the Browns or the Steelers, one of those two. Steelers might have been last year, Browns might have been the year before that. He threw 4 interceptions. So like
Yeah.
the I don't know that this is necessarily worse than we've seen them look, and they tend to like figure it out. So we'll see.
The one thing I will say that I was really encouraged by in this game is the Bengals offensive line played very well. They got a high marks from PFF pretty much across the board. Um, there was some pressure. Keon White was able to get a couple of sacks for the Patriots, but overall, for a unit that's been the biggest question mark for the Bengals over the last couple of seasons, can they keep Joe Burrow clean so he can distribute to all the weapons he has on the outside? This was a encouraging performance. Burrow had like a 5.4 average or yards per attempt with no pressure, which is not a good stat. But you hope that'll kind of self-correct as some of these receivers come back and integrate more into the offense. But what was Cincinnati's biggest question mark, at least on offense coming into the year, even with first-round pick Amarius Mims not in the lineup, still able to put on an impressive performance against what we've come to expect is a pretty good New England Patriots front.
Yeah. I wasn't that was one of the games I did get an opportunity to watch live on Sunday, and I wasn't blown away with their line live, but it's also the offensive line performance is super tricky to like because there's a curve with it. The standard is really, really high. Like I think annually, like the top pass protectors for PFF are at something like 99% like efficiency, and like the middle of the pack guys are at like 96 or 97. So it's a couple percentage points like here and
Mm,
there. So um without like the total, like, I'm sure in like the total picture they were probably toward toward the upper half. Every team's fan underrates their offensive line performance for the most part.
yes, offensive line is like cornerback. Everyone remembers the one bad play you had,
Yeah.
and not the 50 good plays where nothing happened.
Yeah.
Um, let's talk a little bit about the Bills before we move into the top 10. This was a team that was the preseason favorite in the AFC East, although maybe the most split sort of consensus wise. There was never really a consensus on who was going to win this division. You had believers in the Bills, Dolphins, and Jets kind of equally. Um, the Bills under Josh Allen kind of entering a new era. Stephon Diggs is now in Houston. Lots of defensive starters and a couple on the offensive line are now in other places as well. I was not blown away by the Bills against Arizona. What did you see in that matchup?
This one was really interesting to me. So this is, I didn't catch this one live. So my process for like watching games, I'll try and catch as much as I can with Sunday Ticket, which I was delayed on getting this year, but I'm gonna get back on the bandwagon this week because the NFL has me in its grips.
Just got
But
us
they
over a
also,
barrel.
the like 12-minute cut-ups the league puts out on YouTube after the game are usually pretty good for getting like a set, like you get a lot
Mm-hmm.
of the third downs, big plays on both sides of the ball. So those usually give you like an okay like sense. You miss a lot of incomplete passes, which because that's not a highlight. But incomplete passes can often like tell you, like those filler plays can tell you a lot about like what teams are trying to do. This is a long rambling way of like getting around to like, the reaction I was seeing about this game because Arizona went up like 17-0 or 17-3 or something like that. People were saying like, oh, it's another classic like Josh Allen game. Um, and I'm looking at the box score while the Panthers are ripping my heart out. And I'm like, there's no turnovers. He's only thrown like two incomplete passes, or he had the fumble. So no interceptions. He's thrown like two incomplete passes, and they have like 125 yards of total offense after the first quarter. Like, what am I missing here? So like, overall, I think, you know, they're still they're still the Bills in a lot of ways. Josh Allen is gonna do Josh Allen things and like rushing the ball, throwing the ball, like, you know, he gives this team like a very high floor. I think
Mm-hmm.
they've got interesting weapons, like none of these guys on their own are really like anything to write home about yet. But as a group, like it's enough that you can like especially against defenses like the Cardinals, which this legitimately like might be one of the worst defenses in the NFL. Like the personnel on that side of the ball is either young and still like growing into who they're going to be, or just flat out like not up to par. Um,
Yeah.
so like Buffalo's going to have like more difficult like tests down the road, and they're going to be put in situations where these young guys are going to be asked to win one-on-one matchups, and where they can't be like schemed up, or where Allen can't scramble around and just like find someone. And I think that's going to be a little more telling. Teams like to talk a big game about like, oh, we don't have a number one receiver, we have five number ones, and no one knows where the ball is going to go, and that's to our advantage. The reality is when it's 3rd and 6 and you need someone to win on their route, having that number one guy or those like two clear options where the defense can only like take one away is huge. And I think Buffalo can get away with that more because they have Josh Allen. And he's such a like, you cover everyone and he like scrambles around, and some like it's a 7-second play, someone gets downfield and he bombs it 60 yards. Or you like run around and it's 3rd and 15 and he's like fast enough, big enough, like he can outrun your linebackers and truck over your defensive backs to like pick up 15 yards on a 3rd and long. Like he he's legitimately like capable of like carrying the team in those moments when the supporting cast kind of falls a little short. And that's not going to work all the time. Like there's a reason they're 11th here, but I still think this is like a very dangerous team.
Yeah, I am worried about the Bills' defense.
Yeah.
In a game where, I mean, the Cardinals' offense could be pretty good. Kyler Murray is a good quarterback who's now healthy. He has like top 10 upside
Yeah.
in this offense. They have some good weapons in Trey McBride at tight end, and Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. on the outside, Greg Dortch in the slot. I will say, a little concerned for the Buffalo defense, given how productive the Arizona offense was, and their top two wide receivers, Michael Wilson and Marvin Harrison Jr. combined for 2 catches.
Yeah.
That is concerning if you're a Bills fan. That the top two weapons in this offense outside of quarterback Kyler Murray were largely kept in check by the Buffalo secondary, and the Cardinals were able to march up and down the field and kind of score at will until late in this game. So if I were a Bills fan, that would kind of be the one thing I'm looking at and kind of putting a pin in. Maybe this Arizona offense is just going to be one of the best in the NFL, and this defense will be fine. But I think the Thursday night matchup that has already happened by the time this is going live, I think will be very telling in terms of can the revamped Bills defense keep up with what we know is an incredibly explosive Miami offense?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it'll be, and the Bills Dolphins games are always a ton of fun too. So that'll be,
Oh, for sure.
it's
Yeah.
kind of a shame this one is on a short week, but
Yeah. Dolphins might be down. They're already down at least Raheem Mostert as of recording. We don't know if Devon Achane is going to play or not.
yeah.
But we'll have to see how the Bills defense kind of bounces back in that matchup.
Yeah.
Moving into the top 10, we have the New York Jets, fresh off a disappointing week one loss on Monday Night Football to San Francisco 49ers. The Dallas Cowboys at number 9 with a beatdown of the Cleveland Browns. The Philadelphia Eagles hanging in at number 8 after the win in Sao Paulo against the Green Bay Packers. The Indianapolis Colts take a jump in my rankings this week up to number 7, a little higher maybe than I expected. Even I expected after a 2-point loss at home to the Texans, and those Houston Texans at number 6 move up a little bit. Let's talk about the Colts because I'm wearing a Colts jersey. I think people are going to have some questions about this one. I kind of alluded to this in the preamble here that this was unexpected even for me as I was building these rankings out on Monday, that they were ranked that highly. What did you see from the Colts this weekend? And then I'll dive a little bit into kind of the decisions that led to this ordering of teams here in this
Yeah.
group.
So I think there's a ton to be excited about in Indianapolis. I think this ranking feels a little bullish to me. I don't want to rain on the parade too much, but there's a ton to be excited about. Like Anthony Richardson is just a specimen. As a Panthers fan, it warms my heart to see like a version of Cam, slightly smaller, like reincarnated, doing like Cam Newton things on the field. So he's awesome. And it's like, but still, having said all of that, like he makes plays that very few other quarterbacks in the league can. At the same time, this is effectively his rookie year. It's like his like 19th start or something like that. I'm pretty sure between like college and the NFL, he has like less than 20 starts at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So very young quarterback still needs to play, needs to learn. And I think like you mentioned earlier in the show, like there's stuff or might have been earlier in the show, might have been just us talking on the side. He needs to play and needs to learn how to read defenses better. And he also needs to improve his accuracy. And I have much more confidence that he can do the former than the latter. And that's okay too. Like with Cam, you just lived with the fact that he was going to sail passes from like time to time. And you knew that he wasn't going to be a quarterback that you lived in the quick game. He was someone that you were going to attack downfield and put defenders in conflict with his rushing ability.
Mm-hmm.
So Richardson can improve a little bit more. Like there was like a 4th and 1 that I'm sure you know what I'm talking about, where wide open, sailed it 6 feet over his head.
Yeah.
And you need to have those, but you can there's some room for improvement there. And that's again, that's where I come down on the Colts of like this is still like a relatively like young team. Um, you have key players who, you know, have a ton of potential but need to put it together, and you just get growing pains when you have that. 'Cause, you know, Richardson is going to have games on offense where the big throws aren't there and they don't come together for whatever reason and they don't move the ball as successfully. The defense is I thought the pass rush looked really good. You know, like you said, the run defense is bad. They lost Juju Brents today for
Hmm.
probably the year. So and the cornerback was already like a major weakness. Nico Collins ate their lunch money again. So you know, like they look like they're probably going to be in a fair amount of shootouts. Last year, they were like 2 plays away from winning the division. So, you know, I think there's going to be like some ups and downs, bumps in the road. But overall, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about.
That's a good breakdown. Richardson went 9 of 19, which is not really what you want to see from your starting quarterback. But he also threw for over 200 yards. He had over 17 yards per completion, which is just ridiculous. Over 11 yards per attempt.
Yeah.
Um,
It's
that's
three. If I remember right off of like some of the stats, it was 3 completions is like 75% of his yards.
He had 3 completions over 50 yards. The average over the past few seasons is like 5 per week across the entire league.
Yeah.
He had 3 of them, and just by himself. That's kind of going to be the Anthony Richardson experience this year. Is just high variance play. You mentioned the 4th-and-1 pass where rookie receiver Adonai Mitchell burned his defender off the line of scrimmage and was wide open for an easy first down. And I mean that ball flew several yards into the stands. So he needs to clean that up, but I'm sure everyone's seen the viral play at this point, the in stride 70-yard pass to Alec Pierce, where uh, Houston pass rush is pushing his right tackle like right into his lap, and the safety's bearing down on him, and he slips in the break and flat footed, just arm talent all on its own. He
Yeah.
cannot step into the throw, just pops that thing over 2 defenders. That's what gets exciting about Anthony Richardson from a Colts fan's perspective, but also just as a fan of football in general. This guy's going to be a must-watch TV every week because you never know when you're going to see something like that and when you're going to see something else crazy, maybe in the other direction as well, as he's kind of learning the ropes. Like you said, less than 20 starts between college and the NFL combined. Um, I mean, this team was 2 plays away, like you said, from winning the division and getting a home playoff game last year. Came up just short against the Texans, like they did again to open this season. Uh, but you know, if Richardson can play like this, he offers a lot more upside than Gardner Minshew did last year, and this team can maybe reach some new heights. Let's talk about a couple of teams below them. The Jets at 10 kind of have 3 AFC East teams in a row there, 10 through 12, because I don't really know what to do with any of them. None of them looked very good week one,
Yeah.
I didn't think. Um, the Jets maybe least impressive of them all, but didn't really see anything that would make me waver from my decision to like I had picked them to win the AFC East before the season. I don't think really anything changed this week in terms of what team you would pick of those three. It was not what I think Jets fans were hoping to see from Aaron Rodgers in his debut, but obviously he made it to the end of the game, so not as disastrous as last year. Uh, what did you think of the Jets? Because Aaron Rodgers looked good in the pocket, whenever he was asked to move, you could tell he was a 40-year-old quarterback coming off an Achilles injury, that he looked slow and a little skittish, which is probably not what you want to see if you're a Jets fan. What did you think of Aaron Rodgers in particular and the Jets as a whole?
Yeah. I think you know, like you mentioned with the rest of the AFC East teams, like there's really none of them really did anything to change your priors that you came into week one with. And the used like broadly speaking there. So like for me, I thought the Bills would I went back and forth between the Bills and the Dolphins. I eventually settled on the Bills. Like I thought like their experience would win out, they'd win the division. And like I didn't see anything like too different there. With the Jets, I was not as pessimistic about them as I have been the past like 2 years. Um, it felt like, a healthy Rodgers gives them a much better floor as a team. And there's enough talent on both sides of the ball that, they probably weren't gonna bottom out unless he got hurt again. I wasn't sure about the ceiling, and I think the 49ers kind of like exposed that a little bit. Rodgers looked fine. He looked, I, I want to say better than the last time we saw him play. Not the 4 snaps last year, but like his last year with the Packers. I'd have to like look at like I'd have to look at a few more things to like officially plant my flag there. But like he was fine. He wasn't the reason they lost. I think the offense really needs another weapon besides Garrett Wilson and Breece Hall. Wilson's an exciting young player. Like he's still got a few things to learn. Hall had that fumble, same story with him. Like, great player, young, still like coming up. I just what it comes down to with me with the Jets is I just don't trust the coaching. And that's not just Nathaniel Hackett as offensive coordinator, because really like Rodgers is calling a lot of the plays himself anyways. And so Hackett's just the game plan and design, which, is arguably suspect. But, at this point, like Robert Saleh he's going on like 4 years. The record is what it is. They've had opportunity. Like I know the quarterback situation has been bad, but at some point your record like is what it is. And I just think he focuses too much on the wrong things for me, which in that market in particular, like I don't think is like helpful for the team. So I'm overall like I feel the same about them as I did before the season. Like after that game, they're probably in that middle tier of teams in the teens for me still.
Yeah, I think I had them six to start the season. Um, like you said, nothing really happened on Monday night that would change your priors. I saw them as a playoff team, but probably not a true contender, and that's probably what they're going to end up being this year. A wild card team with a chance to win a crowded division where no team is really standing out, and they can get lucky. I mean, worst teams have won playoff games before, but um, they have a long way to go if they want to capitalize on the Aaron Rodgers trade and all the fanfare that comes with it and really make a run to the Super Bowl. But they have a lot of time to get there. This is a offense that's still gelling. Aaron Rodgers is getting his legs back under him. There's a chance this team looks a lot better in Week 18 than they did tonight or
Yeah.
Monday night. But we'll have to see how that plays out.
Oh, yeah,
Do briefly
100%.
talk about the Cowboys before moving on.
Yeah.
This was a team both of us kind of pegged entering the season as a regression team that would be probably underachieving relative to expectations, maybe significantly. Um, Neither of us were real high on the Eagles or the Cowboys entering the season. One of those teams obviously has to win the division. Both looked better than I think we thought they would in week one. But the ultimate question here with the Cowboys is, do you think that dominating performance on Sunday spoke more about Dallas or Cleveland?
I think it spoke more volumes about Cleveland. And again, like I think in one of the picks leagues I was in, I picked Cleveland to win that because I thought Myles Garrett going against a rookie left tackle and Tyler Guyton, I thought that was a mismatch that heavily favored Cleveland. Um, Game was in Cleveland too. You had like all of the noise for Dallas like coming in, and they like they really like credit to them. They weren't perfect, but as far as like week one goes, they were quite solid. I still they have the Saints next, I think, which is going to be a very interesting like barometer for both. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's actually I think that's the game of the week in the Sunday afternoon slate. So it'll be a primetime slate. So I think that's going to tell us a lot about both teams who had very successful week ones, and about what's real and what's not from there. But Cleveland was inept on offense. And so my priors for Dallas was that the Mike Zimmer was going to end up being like a net negative for them, of being like a combination of his scheme has been figured out, which he had 2 years off, so maybe I'm sure he tried to add some wrinkles. So we'll see like how successful those were. And then the second part of that was him being famously like old school and not able to like relate to the current generation of players. And Mike Zimmer is just like a prickly person in general, and not someone you necessarily want when stuff is hitting the fan in a pressure-filled like year where you gotta, not only do you have to make the playoffs, you have to probably win 1 or 2 games and get to the NFC Championship game to like renew your contract if you're Mike McCarthy. So Mike Zimmer doesn't like, having him on your coaching staff isn't necessarily like taking the temperature down. So we'll
Yeah.
see. Like, I don't think the Cowboys didn't really hit enough adversity in this game. And like for me, the question with the Cowboys was always going to be about like what are they going to do when adversity hits, either in the form of injuries or losses. Because the roster is a lot shallower than it was because they just lost so many people.
Yeah. Yeah, Jerry Jones really getting the band back together from like those mid 2010s NFC North
Yeah.
battles with Mike McCarthy and Mike Zimmer.
Yeah.
Famously an era with a lot of wins for both franchises. So we'll have to see how that plays out. Moving into the top five, we have the Los Angeles Rams at number five. They were my pick to come out of the NFC and make the Super Bowl. I am very excited about that pick after week one, despite the loss. We have the Detroit Lions at number four, who got the win in overtime on Sunday Night Football against the Rams. The Ravens at three, just Isaiah Likely couldn't quite get that last toe in, or we will be talking about the number one team in these power rankings. And San Francisco 49ers at two, and the Kansas City Chiefs at number one, kind of round out the top five. I think four teams we all expected would be in the top five, and then a surprise in the Rams. What are your thoughts on the Rams as a team generally, and then specific to where I have them ranked?
I think going up 3 spots after a loss is quite bold. I'll put it that way. Yeah, I mean, so you can't be too out on the Rams because Matthew Stafford and Sean McVay give this team like a pretty high floor, and we saw that last year. Um, I actually think this version of the Rams is, even with everything they like did this whole offseason, it really sneak into the wild card round and maybe win a game good. Um, and so what I mean by that is there's no Aaron Donald, which is huge, bigger than that poster behind you. So the defense is just completely like reshaping its identity right now in a way that they weren't last year, even though I think the other positions are stronger, but like not having Aaron Donald is just like you can't calculate that. So they have to find like a new identity on that side of the ball. And I think the results could end up being like pretty similar, like within like a few places in like the rankings. Um, on offense, big thing like they spent on the offensive line. Like it was Jonah Jackson, it was Kevin Dotson, to go with Steve Avila, and then they had Rob Havenstein and Alaric Jackson at the tackles. Um, Alaric Jackson is suspended. Rob Havenstein hurt his ankle. Steve Avila has an MCL sprain, is going to miss 4 to 6 weeks. He's already on injured reserve. Jonah Jackson missed most of the training camp with a shoulder injury, maybe something with his scapula, and he's back. And then they have Kevin Dotson. But I think one of those, maybe it was just a Villa. But anyways, like the offensive line is getting thin quick again, and that kind of like undercuts all the progress they made like this offseason on the unit. And anytime you've seen the Rams like underperform when McVay has been there, outside of like losing Stafford at the end of 22 when things just like really like nosedived. Um, his issue has always been when the offensive line sags off. And I think they're kind of like running into that a little bit right now. Now the bright side is they have an early bye. None of these are season-ending injuries, so like they have a chance to get like healthier and like pick up some steam. Um, But we've talked about it tonight. Like the NFC West looks pretty darn good. There's not a lot of margin for error to fall behind there. So over, I'm hesitant to get too far out on the Rams, but I'm also like, I don't want to get over my skis with them either.
Yeah, I believe Joe Noteboom was their third tackle, who's now
Yeah,
also on injured
he
reserve.
got he got hurt too. That was it.
He left, I think, like towards the end of the first quarter in that Lions game, and I mean, Aiden Hutchinson just ate his replacement alive. It was really impressive, honestly, that the Rams were able to cobble together an offense the rest of that game, a pretty effective one,
Yeah.
the one that took the Lions to overtime, despite the fact that they had a turnstile at left tackle who just could not block Aiden Hutchinson. And
Yep.
um,
It says a lot about PFF's number 24 graded quarterback, Matthew Stafford, in my opinion.
yeah, he had a good game overall, though definitely hurt them with some untimely turnovers. But yeah, like, I'm excited about this Rams team. Um, More towards the end of the season, I think, once they get healthy. If this offensive line is able to get healthy again, once Nakua is able to come back from
Yeah.
injury, I mean, this offense could be one of the best in the NFL. And the defense looked, they gave you reason for optimism
Yeah.
in week one, despite the loss of Aaron Donald. Jared Verse looked excellent. I thought he looked like the best of the round one edge rushers, at least just from week one. Um, Latu had a solid game for the Colts. Dallas Turner looked good for the Vikings, but Verse I thought looked the best of those three.
Yeah.
Um, Jock Robinson didn't play a whole lot for the Dolphins. This is a Rams defense that's young and kind of missing their corners. I think Chris Collinsworth mentioned it during the broadcast on Sunday night, but the Rams defensive scheme for years was people are gonna have to devote so much attention to Aaron Donald that everyone else gets one-on-one matchups that they can win. That's no longer the case. Braden Fisk is not going to demand the attention that Aaron Donald did, even though he was a prospect I liked out of Florida State this past year. This is a team that's going to have to kind of adjust on the fly. They also traded away Ernest Jones and the Titans to make way for some of the younger options they have at linebacker. So uh, I think the defense and offensive line injuries are things to monitor. But taking the Lions to overtime in Detroit, I think said a lot about what this team can be when they're fully healthy
Yeah,
as well.
that's good. I think I would I'd maybe amend my position to like I could see them easily being like a top five team at some point this year. I don't think they're a top five team right now.
That is that is fair, and everyone has their disagreements in how power rankings are
Yeah,
supposed to be. There are going to be people who are mad that I don't have the 16-1-0 teams at the top of these rankings. So, um, but yeah, I think the Rams are going to turn out to be one of the best teams in the NFL over the course of the season. And on Sunday night did not do anything to dissuade that. Uh, the Ravens were an interesting team to monitor kind of coming into the year, given all the changes that they were undergoing. Very new offensive line. No Odell Beckham Jr., who's now in Miami. So an even more unproven receiving core than a year ago. Uh, Changes defensive coordinator with Mike McDonald, now the head coach in Seattle. So, opening game of the season, they're in Kansas City against the two-time defending champs, and like we talked about, we're a toe tap away from having a chance to win it with a 2-point conversion. What did you see from the Ravens? Did they surprise you at all?
I thought they'd be good. It was just going to be a question of like how good with all the like personnel losses. There's not an organization that's as good as Baltimore as leaning on the pipeline to refuel after players are lost. Like they are the best draft and develop, hire and develop organization like in football right now. Um, so like long term they'll be fine, I think. I think you saw definitely like some of the hiccups with, the offensive line in particular. Lamar had a really rough go of it. And the most consistent way they had of like moving the ball was him running. And I don't know that I don't think they want to live in that world, particularly like if he was jacked up Thursday and like understandably, because like the Chiefs are probably one of their bigger rivals. But I mean, he was lowering his shoulder into hits that he had like no business lowering his shoulder into. And so like I mean, that's fine if you're playing the Chiefs, maybe, but like like that's just not sustainable like over the course of the season. So that's one thing I have my eye on, like offensive line. It does seem like Lamar wants to run a little bit more this year. He talked about like slimming down so he could be faster.
Mhm.
And there's no reason to be faster if you're not going to be running. So I still think they're like a very, very solid team. I think there's a chance that some of these other teams kind of like surge up and like knock them down a peg while they're like figuring stuff out. But I mean, I didn't see anything to make me think that they wouldn't make the playoffs.
Yeah, this was, I thought, a pretty solid performance for them across the board. The offensive line looks like it could be an issue for them all season long. And if they're not able to kind of reach the heights they want to achieve, that might be why. But yeah, I thought this was a very solid team. You mentioned how amped up they were to face the Chiefs and Lamar Jackson lowering his shoulder. That's not a great sign for week one. Kind of treat this game like their Super Bowl. It almost reminded me of the Eagles last year. We didn't really talk much about the Eagles at number 8 in these rankings, but they started last year 10-1, off the Super Bowl loss to the Chiefs the year prior, and we all kind of knew that they weren't as good as a 10-1 team. Like this was a team that kind of eked by some bad teams and caught a couple lucky bounces to get there. But they go into Kansas City and win to kind of cap off that 10-1 record, get their 10th win. Uh, midway through the season, Nick Sirianni is looking like he wants to fight Kansas City fans in the tunnel and screaming about how about that Super Bowl loss now and all this stuff. And they won like one more game the rest of the year, two more games the rest of the year. It reminded me a little bit of that, where the Chiefs are the big bad. They're the two-time defending champs now, and this is a team that's beaten Baltimore in the playoffs a couple times in recent years, and a team that Baltimore needs to get past to win a Super Bowl. And uh, this is not the playoffs. This is week one of the regular season. Like you have 16 more games you have to play before you have a chance to kind of get your revenge in the spot that matters. And I hope that the Ravens are able to kind of keep their focus and not let this loss deflate them for the rest of the year.
Yeah. There's like a mental thing with them too. Because whenever they play Kansas City, they end up looking just so tight. And like you saw it in the AFC title game too, and they just do stuff that's like uncharacteristic of how they play in most of the other games. Now, I mean, I will say Baltimore had some games that they lost last year that I still like I've watched cut ups and like clips from it. Like, I've gone through games like multiple times and it's like I still don't know how they finished on the wrong side of the score.
Yeah. Yeah, uh it'll be something to watch for sure, as this is a team that, with the Bengals looking not like themselves in week one, are probably the favorites right now pretty comfortably to win that division. We'll see how the Bengals bounce back, but
They're leaving out the Steelers. The division
yes, the
leading
Steelers,
Steelers.
division leading Pittsburgh Steelers, the only AFC North team to win their game in week one.
Mhm.
I think the Steelers are a very safe bet to go 9-8 once again and extend the most ridiculous but ultimately meaningless streak in NFL history with all those winning seasons. So with the Chiefs and the 49ers, the top two, I don't have a whole lot to say about them. These are, you know, kind of where we expected they would be after one week. They both got big wins over some teams that were expected to be and still could be very, very good. Some home wins are probably still the favorites in their respective conferences. Is there anything they showed you that would change your perspective on either one?
No, they are who we thought they were, to quote the great Dennis Green. I was a little nervous about San Francisco just because of how bad the vibes were like all summer and all of that.
Yeah.
And, not having Christian McCaffrey, I it could catch up with them. But Jordan Mason looked really good too.
Mm-hmm.
So like, that's going to be another battleground in the running backs don't matter wars. But yeah, I mean, Kansas City looks great. San Francisco looked really good. I think Yeah, there were some there were some concerns about San Francisco's defensive line because it's not as stacked as we're used to seeing from them. But I mean, they handled the Jets pretty well. And the Jets look like they still have like a pretty solid O line, and San Francisco did a good job with that. So, you know, overall, they are who we thought they were.
Absolutely. So before we wrap this up and get out of here real quick, is there any takeaway from week one you had that you didn't get a chance to share so far? Something either with a specific player or team that we didn't touch on, or maybe like a trend that you noticed or something like that?
I don't think so. Week two is always super fun too because you get
Yeah.
you get that second data point, you get to see, oh, okay, this was a fluke. Okay, these guys might be for real. And then you have one of my favorite pieces I to write every year at the site is a look through at all the like 0 and 2 teams and like trying to pick which, because statistically speaking, 0 and 2 is a death knell for your playoff hopes.
Mm-hmm.
There's usually one team that can, at least one team that can get over it. So you can kind of go through and like it's a fun way to like break out the crystal ball. So
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, thank you for joining me, Logan. I appreciate you coming on the show.
yeah.
That'll do it for us here at Single High Coverage. We'll see you at 1 p.m. on Friday next week.